Welcome to Amici, news and insights from the New York Judiciary and the Unified Court System. I'm John Carr. Today's program is another episode of Diversity Dialogues with Susan Goodman. Today, Susan's guest is Lakisha Hickson, the Chief Clerk in the Westchester Supreme and County Court.
So let's begin with a general kind of question about how you would describe your current role. Do you have 3 words that you would use to describe your job? And if so, what are they?
Yes, of course. I think the first thing that comes to mind is I would say busy. Mm-hmm. Every day in the role of chief clerk brings new adventures. You know, we have to come in with an understanding that everything won't be completed before quitting time. But, you know, just being able to prioritize and meet those deadlines is a daily goal. Number 2, I'm going to say important. You know, just managing all aspects of the court, everything from like the courtroom to the broom closet to everything in between. You know, it calls for a daily review of priorities, making necessary adjustments, and just staying current with the law and procedures, managing our standards and goals, pursuing to our chief judge's excellence initiative. You know, these are pretty important factors that we have to weigh in.
Mm-hmm. And can you talk a little bit more about the excellence initiatives? I didn't mean to interrupt. I just thought, you know.
No worries. So with the excellence initiative, we have to manage our standards and goals and how the measure for how we use to monitor how cases are disposed. So part of our role here is to constantly monitor these cases and just make sure that we are on track for disposal within the guidelines that are provided. So just reviewing case data, running reports and seeing where we're at, calling in cases that are like further out, you know, looking for cases that are just like hanging around with no court appearance, just bringing parties in just to make sure we stay current. And just to get back to the question.
Yes, thank you.
The third thing I would like to say is it's rewarding. You know, when you're in a position like this, you know, I can turn around and mentor those that are, you know, maybe possibly on the same track that want to maybe promote within the court system. I can identify and understand where they're going through. So I find that very rewarding when I can share a story or someone can ask me, hey, how did you become a chief clerk?
So how did you become a chief clerk? Can you, I mean, tell us, you know, what the, I mean, obviously not every step of the way, but the ones that you feel are maybe interesting or educational for others to hear.
Well, I kind of came up the tracks, as they say. I took promotional exams, starting with the senior court clerk exam. I passed that. Then I passed another one to become an associate court clerk exam. And from there, you know, hard work paid off, and I was appointed to an assistant deputy chief clerk position. And again, just working really hard until I was able to be appointed as a chief clerk. So just hard work, really. You know, paying your dues, putting in your time, you know, always just working hard, not to be seen, but just to work and be compassionate to get the work done. And somehow that was noticed.
And then going into the idea of diversity, since that's the crux of what we're talking about today, what is your definition of diversity? How would you describe it?
Well, diversity is having an office or a court where people come from different backgrounds, where we're all different from one another, but we have the same work ethics and goals when it comes to making a productive atmosphere, just being respectful of each other and not being offended by the way others may look or way they dress or holidays that they celebrate. You know, just others having a background that's different from our own.
And how do you personally encourage people? I mean, personally, in the sense of in your professional role, of course. how do you encourage people to honor the uniqueness of each individual?
Well, first off, I like to lead by example. So I would just encourage others to be respectful of each other, religions, and the way someone may dress, or, just being supportive when they have, like, events that may celebrate or honor something that's different from my own, just to appear and be supportive of that event and help out where I can.
And can you give some examples of ways that you do encourage diversity and, coming together in that way?
Yeah, well, we may have events, like, I'll give an example where we may have an event where we're celebrating a holiday that may not be my own. I would encourage staff to attend, maybe just make some leeway where they provide coverage so that they can attend an event that may be going on in the building to celebrate something.
Okay. Then going into back to your role, what would you say your biggest achievement is to date, professionally or personally?
Yeah. Well, I would have to say making chief clerk would have to be my biggest professional achievement.
How long have you been chief clerk?
Almost 2 years now. Almost 2 years now. That's an honor, So I consider that my greatest achievement by far in the workforce. Just being able to be recognized for the hard work that I've done, being able to get to this place and still be the same Lakisha I was when I was a senior court office assistant. It's an achievement to me just to be approachable by all, for someone to say, oh, that's just Lakisha. She worked really hard. She made chief clerk. The greatest achievement to me.
That's great. That's great. Can you describe a typical day in your life as a chief clerk?
Oh, boy. Well, no day is the same, as you can probably tell. But I like to check in with the staff just to see if there's any pressing issues in any department, touching base with the managers to see what they're working on, to see if there's any assistance that they may need. Generally, just staying current with my emails. As you can imagine, they're coming in all the time. Just reviewing case data and reports. Again, that takes us back to those standards and goals. Just making sure that our cases are on the right track. Reviewing notes or preparing for upcoming events that we may be working on that may be coming up. As an example, in our court, we are converting over to UCMS. So, just staying on top of that, preparing notes for our next event, or the criminal e-filing that's coming our way also. Just being ready for when those events come, that I can lead the way with a smooth transition. And basically just being prepared for anything that may come up throughout the day to handle. There may be someone that is having a difficult time at one of my counters. I try to be hands-on where I can jump in and help out if there is no other manager around. Just being available and ready for what the day brings.
And what do you like most about what you do?
I like the interaction that I'm able to have with all staff. When I was a clerk, you're just confined to your courtroom and you only have the interaction with those that come into your courtroom. But being outside of the courtroom now, and I appreciate the interaction that I can have with not just the clerks, but the interaction that I can have with chamber staff, with court officer operations, outside agencies. I appreciate the limits that are now taken off of me from when I was a clerk. I appreciate the positive changes that I can offer when I see something that could be of the betterment of our court. I like being able to help people, especially those that others would find difficult. I find it rewarding feeling when someone that may come to one of our counters or would call in and may seem kind of angry, and at the end of our conversation feels like I helped them, or you feel they're not as angry as they were when our conversation first started. You know, I like that kind of too about my job, that I'm able to take that difficult person and be able to help them.
Yeah, that's often, you know, in the moment, very important.
Right, so that way they don't feel like, oh, I called the court and no one was able to help me. Well, you know what? You got to speak to the chief, and I'm going to help you.
That's wonderful. Yeah. Okay. Let's. Can you talk about mentorship and who might have been a mentor to you along the way and why?
Oh, mentors are very important, can I tell you? I've had quite a few. And let me just put a spotlight on my prior court that I worked in, New York City Civil Court. I had quite a few there, and I'll just shout out some names.
Okay.
So from Civil Court, I had Eddie Valdez, Serena Springle, and Aaliyah Razak. These three individuals poured into me as a junior manager, let's just say, as a supervisor. And, you know, just by watching how they work and how they interact, they were all senior titles to me. And I appreciate the time that they put in to say, hey, Lakisha, you know, you may have handled something this way. Situation comes around again, why don't you try this approach? You know, we're just giving me little tips and pointers and ideas. And, you know, I'm very thankful for them. That all that information that they poured into me the 9 years I worked there, I find incredibly rewarding. And, you know, now as a chief clerk, you know, here in my current court, I'm thankful that I have Nancy Barry. She was the former chief clerk, and now she's the district executive. She would kind of be in my mentor role. She's the person that I call now to run something by her. And I feel that we all need that. You know, and in return, I try to be that for someone else.
And how would you advise prospective applicants, either who are outside the court system or those who wish to advance within it?
Well, don't be afraid of hard work. That would be the first thing I would say. You know, don't be afraid to ask questions, especially when you're in a lower title. You know, ask me what I do. Ask me how I've come to that decision. You know, just not being afraid to think outside the box, you know. Always encouraging others to think about this. Your work ethic is always going to follow you. You know, I still have people that still remember me as a senior court office assistant, you know. So always keep that in mind, you know. Always leave the greatest impression you can when you're working with someone or in a department. And when it comes to promotional tests, I encourage study, study, study.
And before you leave this position, which hopefully will be a long time, what would you like your greatest achievement to have been?
Oh, yes, long time. So before I leave this position, I would just like to be remembered as someone that worked really hard and with compassion for the work. And just my greatest achievement will be having all staff, judicial and non-judicial staff, feeling supported by me and feeling that I've led this team.
Thanks for listening to Amici. You find all of our recent podcasts on the court system's website at www.nycourts.gov, and most are also in the iTunes podcast library. If you have a suggestion for an Amici podcast, please let me know. I'm John Carr, and I can be reached at 518-453-8669 or jcaher@nycourts.gov. In the meantime, stay tuned.